Nigeria, of course, is in a transition period with new leadership that has already got the ball rolling with some reforms. Now, the impact of those reforms is what needs to be discussed. How patient should the populace be when it comes to these reforms and these decisions that are being made in the nation? So joining us, of course, from our Abuja studios, Dr. Olusiji Sanya. He's the Chief Financial Officer, co-founder of Tranzfer. He's also an economist, so we're going to be happy to delve into the economy with him. Dr. Olusiji, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning to you. How much patience do you think is needed on the part of the citizenry to see changes from government reforms? Nigerian populace seems to want immediate change.
Good morning, Rotus. Thanks for having me again. Well, I think it's an interesting period of difficult changes that need to be made. And of course, those changes come with tough decisions. So clearly, we need a lot of patience from the Nigerian populace and a lot of understanding from them as well. Because, of course, in the short term, a lot of painful changes are being made and still need to be made. For example, fuel subsidy is a great policy for the country Nigeria and in the long term for the people of Nigeria whom the Nigerian economy is supposed to serve. But of course, in the short term, it's painful because for the average household, the amount you spend on filling up your fuel tanks has gone up, and that is painful. And that is just one example out of many to come of painful things that we need to endure, but of course, with perspective and understanding.
What do you make of the reforms that we've seen so far, particularly fuel subsidy removal and the currency devaluation?
I mean, there's no way to exaggerate how positive those actions are. Kudos to the new administration for taking those difficult but important steps. I agree with the reforms. They're long overdue, but of course, as we said, they're painful. So, for example, the president talked a few weeks ago about how much has been saved, since subsidies have, been stopped. But of course, more importantly, what we can do, in other areas, infrastructure, etc., with what has been saved, the amount, of course, of FX conserved, because as a result of the subsidy going up, the arbitrage of to neighboring countries, i.e. the re-exporting of PMS and other products has closed. Demand, in brackets, demand destruction has happened, and that means, in principle, we should be spending less importing in terms of dollars. So, of course, there are a lot of good effects, short-term and potentially long-term. Of course, one other good side of subsidy removal is investors in refineries, modular refineries, can now be confident that the economic environment favors taking the risk to invest. Of course, investment in refineries is a long-term investment, right? So you need to be confident that the environment will support your business. So there are a lot of great things. And same for the currency devaluation that you mentioned as well. It's a step in the right direction, painful at first, allowing that market to rebalance by itself, signaling to local international markets that Nigeria is ready for FDI, Nigeria is ready for business, the market to determine the value of the naira and not, arbitrary determinations. And those things are good. I was joking with a friend before the new government was inaugurated, and I said, if those are the only two things that the new government does, we're good. Of course, a lot more will happen. But those two reforms, if you ask me, are like foundational for the wider reforms that need to come for Nigeria. And of course, the good potentials we're expecting.
All right, you mentioned, reducing imports and so on. Is import dependency, the import dependency of the economy, is that a hurdle to some of these reforms, like on the currency side, for instance?
It is, because of course they go in different directions, right? We say that we want a strong naira. We say that the naira is sort of losing, but of course, in the long term, the way to actually strengthen the naira is to get the Nigerian economy substituting its imports, for example. A lot of things that we import, I read something yesterday that said we spend $5 billion on importing paper. And that's ridiculous because we can produce it. Now imagine if that paper was produced locally, and that technically means you save $5 billion in FX. And saving $5 billion in FX, counting that in a number of sectors and industry means that the reserves that the CBN controls is bolstered, the confidence in the Naira is strengthened. So really, if you ask me in a very simplistic way, we really need to reduce our imports if we really want a strong currency. Again, it's a journey, it's a process, and it will be painful.
Thank you so much. Dr. Olusiji, we have to pause for just a second because there's a terrible building collapse that happened in Abuja. I want to go over to our correspondent. We will continue the conversation, maybe even bring real estate into this conversation when we come back to you. But let's go to our correspondent, Gbenga Shiru, who is on the ground in Abuja, to give the Federal Capital Territory, to give us an update. Yeah, Gbenga, thanks. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. So what is the latest? We understand 2 feared dead, 37 others rescued or so. What's the latest on this building collapse?
I must tell you, this is quite unfortunate, considering the fact that it was here that was the main theater of the tragic event that happened just barely 5 months ago at Gwarimpa, just about 15 kilometers away from here. And now we are hearing news of a needless tragedy that broke out here just last night at 11 p.m. at the popular Lagos streets here in Abuja, Lagos Street in Gariki in Abuja. And we understand that the building caved in around 11 p.m. yesterday night, and immediately rescue agencies that swung into action to rescue about 37 bodies, in which out of it we understood that 2 were fatally injured. So it's rather unfortunate. Just some minutes away, we had an interview with a new FCT minister who had been reading the Riot Act as if it was a prophet, as if he saw this coming, that this tragic event was just at hand.
Keep going, I can hear you.
Now, he said this is really unfortunate, and he also said that when he was reading the Riot Act, he wasn't out to be vindictive, or he wasn't out to target, or it wasn't even politically motivated, but he feels that there is a need for everyone to be secured. So this event happening right now is a wake-up call and a call to action. And indeed, the FCT minister, Nyesom Wike, had said that he would take action on this. He would ensure that the owner of the property here is arrested and the relevant authorities swing into actions and investigation is done. He also called for time, that it's rather unfortunate that this is like a rude awakening because it just resumed barely 48 hours ago and this is happening. So it shows that the FCT minister has his work cut out. For now, the area has been cordoned off. Security agencies, rescue agencies have been here trying to make the most out of the rubbles. For now, like I told you, we understood that 37 bodies were rescued, but 2 were fatally injured. In the collapse realm, when you say someone is fatally injured, I'm sure you know what that means, that is indeed a sad news and a tragic news indeed.
Doctor, I don't know if you want to comment on this. Is this a structural issue, as far as real estate is concerned? Is it the quality of building materials? I mean, we're talking about reform here. We want to talk about Nigeria's real estate sector. There's no liquidity, right? With respect to mortgages, there's a long line of people who are waiting to be able to access what is being promised as far as being able to finance a 30-year mortgage. But that's liquidity. We're talking about safety here now. What are your thoughts on what we've just seen? We just keep getting these tragic building collapses. Is it the quality of materials? Are we cutting corners just to erect a building and collect rent from people and sidestepping the safety issues?
It's rather unfortunate that this type of thing keeps happening in Nigeria across different states. But I think what is most important is we can't build on a system that relies on the morality of others. to protect the public. And what I'm trying to say is that we need more regulation and standardization in that space. So, if a builder or developer advertises a new building, no matter how prime or not prime it is, the idea is that before anybody is allowed to occupy that building, especially not even before they're allowed to, as that building is growing, I mean, the whole, the legacy building controls and all those type of things, which are normally supposed to be part of the planning process. You get planning for the type of building you can put on. And then as that building is going up, there's supposed to be a process where you're working hand in hand with the regulator. They're checking up on what you're doing, the quality of materials you're doing. And of course, they certify that building structurally fit and fit in other areas before anybody can live in, whether as a landlord or a tenant or whatever. So for me, I think this is a structural issue with regulation. Again, we can't keep hoping and depending on the good nature of a businessman, i.e. the real estate people, to basically do things right. So we need solid regulation that protects the public. And I think that's what, for me, that's what jumps out to me here.
All right, Dr. Olusiji Sanya, Chief Financial Officer of Tranzfer. We're going to continue the conversation. I want to take a quick break. Because my next question to you is why regulation keeps failing in Nigeria, even though it's supposed to be there. So we'll be right back. It's the Global Business Report here on Arise News. Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Arise News. We still have Dr. Olusiji Sanya, Chief Financial Officer at Tranzfer in our Abuja studios. We're talking about reforms in Nigeria, and here we are, of course, with this tragic update coming from our correspondent Bengashiru in Abuja on that multi-story building that collapsed. So, Dr. Olusiji, you are just talking about the need for regulation, and this is couched within our conversation around the need for reforms in Nigeria. Regulation has to be part of this conversation on reforms. Why does it keep coming up? Especially when you see things like this with these buildings that continue to collapse. What is it? Is it corruption? Is it the fact that people, our regulators can be bribed and not do their jobs properly, or they are incompetent? Why does regulation continue to come up in Nigeria, and why do people keep having to lose their lives, like what we've just seen?
Thank you, Retus. I think, again, beyond some of those, regular perceptions around bribery and corruption with the regulatory system, I think there's also a wider structural issue. In many countries, including Nigeria, sometimes regulation doesn't move as fast as the industry that it's regulating, right? And that cuts across industries. I think the mechanism, the way regulation is executed must improve. That's what I was trying to say earlier about, the way it works right now in Nigeria, a developer gets a piece of land, gets the appropriate plan and authorization, and goes ahead, markets it, and then everybody comes to buy or rent, as it were. But there needs to be a more stringent process, a more involved process. Because ultimately what should happen is, as a consumer, either as somebody who is about to buy a building or rent a building, I should be able to rely on government certification, meaning my safety, I'm passing the buck of my safety not to the landlord or to the developer, but to the government. If a government regulator has said, this house is safe to live in, then I'm moving into that house with that confidence, not from the person selling it, but from the government. And what that means is the government must now be more proactive, more involved, in making sure that these things are happening. It might mean that you need to increase the capacity of the number of regulators and relevant agencies across the states. In some countries, you have one regulator covering that space. Of course, in Nigeria, we do things a bit differently, and it's not a bad thing. But the more important thing is the regulator must be more involved, must be deeply involved, and at the end of the day, must have the final say on where. So for me, it's not just about shiny adverts. When I arrived at Abuja yesterday, driving through from the airport, I saw a lot of great adverts of new homes coming soon. And of course, that's what a businessman should do, sell his product. But at the same time, it should then, for me, those adverts must then carry that certification. And I should be able to validate and verify. This home has been checked by so, federal, state, local agency. And as such, I, as a member of the public, can confidently move in. So the regulator must catch up pace with the industry must be proactive and not, reacting after this type of incidents. So the regulator must have a clear mapping of the industry, must have regular continuous intelligence on the industry, and be able to move. Of course, this also goes into the space of the SON in terms of quality of materials used and things like that. But you need to have one regulator that owns that space and owns the responsibility in each jurisdiction for the safety and certification of buildings and other things that we consume as members of the public.
Thank you so much for that. Well, we're still talking reforms. You're a transfer. You folks are in the space where you deal with remittances. We were talking earlier about the Central Bank of Nigeria rebutting JP Morgan's estimate that we only have $3.7 billion in reserves. What do we need to bring in? The Vice President Shetima, he's in Johannesburg at the BRICS Summit. Nigeria, unfortunately, wasn't added as a new member. The BRICS Summit has a development bank that's been doling out loans. How do we get in more FX into Nigeria, Dr. Sanya?
I mean, for me, there are two ways. We were talking about it earlier. We need to reduce that import bill. And when I say reduce structurally, again, not by making a brash announcement that we should stop importing this or that, but we really need to work on a very clear import substitution industrialization strategy, which we need. We have a big market, and that is something that is good for us. Whether it is true that we're 100 million or 150 million or 170 million or 200 million, the point is we have a big market. We consume a lot, which is good. But we're also blessed with the resources and the potential to produce a lot of these things that we consume. So first things first, we need to get producing. We need to substitute those imports. There are also things that we are net exporters of. We need to push those things out, but in a value-added way. We're one of the few countries in the world, I know Ghana and Ivory Coast are key, that export cocoa. That's great. But the cocoa we export is basically pumped into chocolate, one of the most premium products that people consume all over the world. We talk about Belgian chocolate and Swiss chocolate, and they attract a premium. I'm not saying those operations should stop. What I'm saying is I want to eat Maltesers made in Ikorodu. Same brand, same quality, but made in Nigeria. And what that does is it helps us conserve our FX. The exporting of those products to the international market will generate FX for us. We need to substitute our imports on the energy side. What I'm trying to say is we need to refine, the oil that we use, the products. They need to come from Nigerian refineries. A lot of the things that we import need to come from, that whole local content buy Nigeria play must come back. So for me, there are structural ways, not overnight ways, but structural ways that we need to fix these issues. And of course, there's the aggressive announcements, we're banning this tomorrow, and some of those things are unrealistic. So we need to take a very careful but hard look at how we basically start to take those structural steps, which won't happen overnight. But ultimately, things that will mean that if the Naira strengthens tomorrow is off the back of active production, exporting value-added products, substituting the imports we can realistically substitute based on our situation and potentials. I think these are long-term ways and, of course, sustainable ways. We don't want the Naira to strengthen for 2 weeks and then, next week it's back. So we can generate a lot of FX. We can conserve the wastage of a lot of FX by reducing our imports and, of course, increasing the value-added exports that we have the strength to do. And all these things are there. We have the data. We know what it is. But we must take those difficult steps, and we must take them in a very calculated, deliberate fashion.
I can already tell you our YouTube caption for this interview is going to be, we need Maltesers made in Ikorodu, Doctor. So that just to let you know, that's what it's going to be. But real quick, we only have a minute to go. The year is almost over. What's your outlook? I mean, the ministers have just announced. Can we write off 2023 to see anything tangible and look to 2024? About a minute to go. What's your outlook as far as moving forward?
Moving forward, I think we still have a lot of great potentials. But one thing I'll say is policymakers must make sure that we are sending the right signal. So we've started on the devaluation path. We've started on the subsidy path. I think we need to keep that path. We can't send out signals that, we've started something and we're turning back. I think that's very important. So for me, the rest of this year, let's consolidate our position on a lot of the reforms that are coming. forward guidance is key. So let's sensitize households and companies of the things that are coming. They can position and prepare. There's a lot of microprudential things that we can do as well to make sure that we are prepared. And for me, I think that dichotomy between, the reforms impacting people's welfare on a daily basis, I think core inflation items should be looked at, so things like, food, so inflation around food, energy, transport, those core things should be looked at. There are many ways, I don't want to go into that we can do that to make sure that the welfare of Nigerians are relatively protected whilst we're doing the rest of the reforms in the country. My outlook for Nigeria would always be positive. And I think under this administration, with the conditions we have the potentials. But in terms of what you said, in terms of writing off 2023, I would say, yes, let's use 2023 to prepare for a strong 2024. But of course, it's a function of the kind of policy announcements and foundations that we lay now.
An optimistic notes to end our segment. Dr. Olusiji Sanya, the Chief Financial Officer, Tranzfer, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.